How well, I think I heard that 30% of the data that's being produced in the world across all, business domains is healthcare data. And
Um,
so you get an idea of the scale of the amount of data. But, in healthcare, we've been talking about interoperability forever.
Welcome to another episode of Data Strategy Unraveled. I'm your host, Khendr'a Reid, Principal Data and GenAI Strategy Specialist here at AWS. And if you've been watching the channel for a little while now, you notice that we've been slowly going through different industries and talking about how a data strategy can really impact these different industries. And so today we're going to talk about healthcare and life sciences and how a data strategy can really impact this industry and transform a lot of the participants that are in this industry here. And to help with this conversation, I have Matt here. Hey, Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. How about you, before we get started, just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're joining us from.
So I'm based out of Atlanta. I lead our healthcare life sciences business development. So thinking about, data in relation to providers, payers, medical devices, and biopharma.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, you're definitely a guy we need to kind of help us with this conversation here. So just to jump right into the questions, how has the role of data when it comes to healthcare and life sciences evolved over the last 5 years? And what do you think, is going to happen in the next 5 years? I know COVID happened, et cetera, and we saw a lot of
Right.
advances there due
Right.
to data and analytics, et cetera. So how has that evolved?
Well, you brought up COVID, and I'll probably start there just because, not only did COVID change everybody's lives, but the response to COVID, when you think about everybody being home, death rates, and then everybody returning to offices and schools in such a short amount of time, that's all data. And
Mhm.
so it really came to the ability to use data to identify and understand more around COVID, to identify a lot of the vaccines. mRNA is a new way of doing vaccines that hasn't historically been done. And so we went from, I think, with what would we get, like 6 months from identification
Yeah.
of COVID to it being out into production. That's incredible when you think about the timeline for how humans have been able to respond to major diseases going back to like the Black Plague, the bubonic plague, a lot of those things back before we had vaccines are really a good healthcare practice. And so that's probably in the last 5 years. But when we think about, healthcare and data, nobody wants to really think about COVID, if we're being honest. These days, it's all the AI ML rave, if you will.
Hmm.
And so, where are we currently? Just thinking about healthcare, highly regulated, lots of compliance. There's two areas of focus. There's one, it's just on productivity, automation, workflows. For as much innovation as we've had in healthcare for maybe the last 100 years, or we'll just say the last 30 years, we still haven't gotten rid of fax machines. They're still highly prevalent, as are pagers, believe it or not, as well as grease boards. So we still have a ton of analog tools that haven't been replaced. And so you're seeing it in production, specifically in like that administrative production area. On the flip side is the clinical space, and that's where you have PHI or patient health information that's involved, highly regulated, because at the end of the day, it's the business of lives. And so there's much more of a cautious approach for how we start going into that space more around generative AI. But if we look at AI and ML specifically in those spaces, it's been there, not prevalent, but we're starting to see some of those use cases open up.
Okay. Yeah, and that kind of gets into my next question around, what is those unique challenges with, HLCS, HCLS, and when it comes to looking to be more data driven, right? You talked a little bit about the patient privacy and the regulatory
Right.
compliance, et cetera, that comes into play there. But,
Right.
what are some of those other challenges that might be facing?
How well, I think I heard that 30% of the data that's being produced in the world across all, business domains is healthcare data. And
Um,
so you get an idea of the scale of the amount of data. But, in healthcare, we've been talking about interoperability forever, right? And so now you have all of this data structured, unstructured. It's not interoperable. It's living in the silos like we like to talk about. And so there's not really much that you can do with it. And so one of the things I've been talking about, especially with Gen AI, is Gen AI doesn't allow you to skip a generation of technology. Still at the core is just the fundamentals of, is it interoperable? Can I leverage it to integrate into my workflows and help some of my physicians and clinicians? So still the same interoperable game that we're trying to solve.
yeah, yeah. So, are there any successful use cases that you've seen where data analytics, generative AI has
Yeah.
really significantly improved those patient outcomes or overall operational efficiency when it came to healthcare?
Let's start with the physician, right? So, in the United States specifically, especially coming out of COVID and even before, there's been a big issue around clinician burnout. And that clinician burnout comes from like meaningful use. When we went all digital and everything went into the EHR, instead of reducing the workload for those clinicians, we actually increased it. And so not only do we have that burnout issue where, you've got people leaving the industry simply because they working too long, too much, too stressful, too much anxiety, because again, they're in the business of saving lives. And so if I think about that space being one of the priorities, the biggest, I guess, innovation is around clinical documentation, right? So the amount of time a clinician spends, I think it's almost minute for minute for every patient that they see. They sit in front of a computer, oftentimes just entering notes from the engagement, the next actions, be it labs or additional testing, any prescriptions. They spend a lot of time. And when you think about clinical documentation or ambient documentation, where you've got technology that can not only hear the conversation, can identify the difference between a patient and a physician, they can start a lot of that coding for that physician so they don't have to spend that minute for minute for every patient. And it's the old saying in healthcare, if I can trim 5 minutes off of the time a physician sees a patient and you extrapolate that out over an entire year, over an entire healthcare organization, it's significant. And so if you reduce a lot of that burden for the physician and a lot of the stress, it increases their ability to improve the outcomes of patients. And so you're seeing that go into production these days, especially over the last year with the advancements around LLMs and foundation models.
Hmm. So, are there any other ways that, generative AI or just traditional machine learning is being integrated into, the day-to-day with these, be it healthcare provider
Yeah.
or any other company within this industry in order to help, better the overall outcomes?
Yeah, if you look at, well, an interesting one, especially is chronic disease management, which is by far the highest amount of cost for getting people healthy again. So high blood pressure, obesity, a lot of those things. And the best way to drive it is behavioral change, right? Believe it or not. And so if you think about like just digital health in general, there have been apps that have been around for, as soon as the iPhone got an app. The challenge has been the outcomes, right? It's okay to have an app, but if an app doesn't change my outcomes, does it really matter? And so
Yes.
now you're starting to see companies like Omada that are on AWS, where not only are they using a lot of the technology, AI, ML, to predict the outcome, as well as understand what part of the world of which they are, because there's those social determinants of health, recognizing that what may be challenging for some people to be well in, say, New York is going to be different than California. And so it's that ability to analyze all of that data, understand not just the person, but the population and the region of which they live. You have those analytics and those analytics can help you change the behavior. But what Omada has found very interesting is, digital by itself doesn't drive human behaviors. It's digital with a human to support you along the way. That's going to drive that behavior. Because let's think about our iPhones or our Apple Watches, and then when it tells you, "Hey, you haven't done your 10,000 steps," how many people actually go do those steps, right? Because there's nobody there holding them accountable. And so I think we're really very much at early stages for some of those things, is understanding what's the what's the outcome or the prediction of the outcome of what's going to happen with this patient. How can I change that? And then I would say specific to precision medicine and personalized medicine. What if I know that your DNA makeup and the efficacy of any drug that I'm going to prescribe for you? So if I know a drug, like, because right now it's kind of a hypothesis based, which is you have an ailment, I'm going to prescribe a drug because I hypothesize it's going to make you healthier, but it doesn't work for everybody's genetic makeup. But if
Mhm.
I know your genetic makeup and I would know the efficacy, it just reduces that time of allowing us to get you healthier or changing your behavior. And so just, the idea of it being as precise to the individual versus very generalized, we're just at the early stages of that. So it's exciting.
Wow. Yeah, that is really neat, right? I'm definitely tied to my Apple Watch and getting those insights there. So if there's a company out there that's really looking to get started and going down this path, using data to really drive their business and, improving their customer outcomes, how would you say they should get started? What are some of the first things that they should be looking at?
Well, I think any company that's getting started these days has to build the company around data itself, right? And so a lot of the incumbents are kind of working backwards, trying to be a data-driven company.
Yeah.
But a lot of the new ones and startups, they're quite agile in the way they put together their business centered around the data itself, right? And so using the data to tell you which products to develop, how to develop those products, the markets and the industries of which to go after, that's the advantage of a lot of the companies that are starting these days. And so it's what's the governance model? What's the I guess the ownership model of that said data? Because what's interesting now is a lot of companies are coming up not as a data to indicate where they should be going, but as almost as the entire underpinnings for their business. Like they'll say, our business is now data, which is fundamentally different than, going back to your early question, the way that a lot of companies were being launched about 5 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we wrap here, if there is customers that are interested, how can AWS help? Well, where can they get started there if they want to go, peruse some information themselves to kind of get skilled up in this area?
Well, we're everywhere, to be quite honest, right? So you can go anywhere from YouTube and our
Yeah.
website just as a starter. We have some great white papers and blogs that deep dive or specifically around data, AI, ML, some of the managed services that we offer in this space. And then I think that we've got a host of resources internally that can help, whether it be how do I become a data-driven company? How do I leverage, the different offerings we have for AI, ML, be it SageMaker or Q or Titan. I think that's the next piece. And then there's more of the consultative arms, people like myself that have been in industry and help take some of the outcomes companies are trying to drive and connect it directly to our technology so that they can have more of a programmatic approach for how they can leverage data to drive their outcomes, be it top line growth or better patient outcomes.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Matt. Thank you so much for, taking the time to kind of provide us some insight into, what the industry is doing as a whole. And we'll be sure, for our viewers to put a lot of that information into the video description below so you can go and learn more about the industry and some of those services that Matt mentioned, as well as Amada as well. We'll put that there as also. But thanks again, Matt, for joining. And thank you all for watching this episode of Data Strategy Unraveled. See you again.
Thanks for having me.